Okay, so in this episode of Cloud with Chris, we're going to be talking all about this little thing called monitoring. Now, as technologists, we like to build stuff, whether it's developing, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's putting data into databases, we love doing stuff. But how often do we really think about the operational aspects that need to be performed as part of our solutions? Monitoring is one of them, and that's what we'll be talking about today on Cloud with Chris. Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and here we talk about all things cloud. Now, thank you for joining here today, folks. As you heard, different topic for today. We've slightly broached the topic in the past, but we've got a very good session, very good speaker I'm delighted to have with me today, talking all about monitoring as a concept overall and thinking about the Azure Monitor suite as it is now, because it's not just log analytics, you've got app insights, you've got a lot of investment happening in the Azure space. So we're going to be talking all about that today. So get ready, because it's going to be an interesting one. So you know what to do. If you like this content, please hit the like button, please hit subscribe on YouTube, and hit the notification bell so you know the moment that we release new episodes here on Cloud with Chris. And what that will do is that will help me just understand, do you like content like this? Do you like some of these more operational aspects? Do you want more of the build type stuff? What is it you're looking to see on the channel? Because that will greatly help. So with that, that's enough of the admin and the ground rules out of the way. Let's go ahead and introduce our guest for today, Vanessa Brewer. Hey, Vanessa, how are we doing?
Hey, Chris. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Much better than last week, where in the UK we were absolutely baking. So with a room full of lights and everything, the outdoor heat, the light heat doesn't really work well. So I'm much happier this week.
Yes, no, it's much better when it's cooler. The silicone brain works better.
Absolutely. So I guess then first off, we should start with some introductions. I know you very well, of course. We've worked together in the past, but for folks on the channel who maybe you're a new name and a new face, let's start with some intros.
Yes, I'm Vanessa Brewer. I work at Microsoft in the Fast Track for Azure team, and I have a deep passion for all things monitoring. I've kind of been working in the monitoring space for about probably longer than I should say, around 20 years. And it's something that I'm really passionate about, and it's something that's often neglected.
It really is. And I think hopefully I put some justice to that in the very beginning there of the intros, because I think we're technologists, right? We like to build stuff. We like to get going, the shiny things. It's like in Up, isn't it? I think the dog, where it's doing something and then squirrel, because there's a new shiny thing. And, we kind of flock towards that and forget about the stuff that really we need to do, because it would be all well and good if we wanted to go and make technology for the sake of technology, but it's always there to solve business problems. It's always there to solve a challenge. And if we're there to solve a challenge, there's going to be some requirements around that. There's going to be some expectations around that. And ultimately, we need to monitor that and understand, is it really doing what it should be doing? And a lot of the time, I think it's an afterthought rather than the main thought of the solution there.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's the mistake that I see most organizations make is they think about monitoring when there is a problem and not right at the beginning. And typically how you should approach monitoring is when you start building the new shiny thing, you should think about all the things that could go wrong with it and how important it is. And don't think about, because if you start thinking about all the things that could go wrong by the time it's built, sometimes it's too late.
Yep, absolutely. So you mentioned there about thinking about things from the very beginning. So, I guess it's really simple, right? Being really condescending and giving a very leading question here. But I guess it's just as simple as putting all your data straight into log analytics and then hoping for the best and seeing what comes out of it, right?
Absolutely. And it doesn't even have to be log analytics. I mean, you could just set up a little Access database somewhere and collect all your metrics and then hope for the best. And that's going to have the same effect. It's something that a lot of companies do, is like, okay, we must collect everything. Okay, now that we have tons and tons of data, what do we do with it? And then they get overwhelmed. and they may switch on some alerts,
Yeah.
and then they get even more overwhelmed, and then they switch it all off and go back to having somebody just watch the screen and say, I hope this is still healthy. Or they wait for the users to complain.
Absolutely. And I think that was where my very, condescending is the wrong word. Words struggle me at the moment, but facetious. Facetious is a better word. In terms of my leading question there, because absolutely, it's not just let's throw the data into some kind of area and then you're suddenly monitoring, right? You need to understand the wider solution, what it is you're trying to do with that solution, because a simple virtual machine is going to have very different characteristics to a distributed microservice and the kind of distributed tracing that you need to work on. So you really need to think through the problem and what questions are you trying to answer and what questions are you trying to get solved.
Yeah, and you should even take a few steps back. So even before you start thinking, is this a container? Is this a virtual machine? Is it a database? You should really take a few steps back and have a monitoring strategy for your organization. And that monitoring strategy shouldn't be built around a tool as like, oh, we have this tool and that tool. Let's make sure that, our strategy is built around that. Ideally, you should be tool agnostic initially and saying, these are our KPIs. This is what makes us successful. These are the things that we care about. And it's, especially with applications that run your organization, run your business, this makes you money. What is the impact of that thing being unavailable, even just for 10 minutes? That is where you should start and start thinking, okay, before we build any new shiny squirrel things, let's think about what is the impact to our organization if there is an outage or a breach or anything like that. Define that strategy. So what is it that makes it healthy? What is it that defines what healthy looks like? So forget about the components. Is, can my users access this? Do they have access end to end? Can they complete a transaction successfully? And a transaction is not always financial. It's just clicking through the steps. Or if it's something that's in the back end, can they speak to each other? Those things are important. Again, and scope it properly, and then define an overall strategy to say, if you're going to build something, this is what you have to keep in mind is, what does healthy look like? You've got to give those KPIs up front, and as you build it, make sure you expose the telemetry as well.
Absolutely. And you can see I'm smiling ear to ear here because this is a passion area of mine because it all really stems from requirements. It stems from having those very clear goals of what you're trying to set and meet. And I think that's the challenge is when we think about, I'm not trying to generalize, but when we think about technologists, we are really excited about the technology. We often forget that there are users who are going to go ahead, use that system, actually interact with that system. So when we've got to think of that kind of end business need of, we want this many users to be using the system, or it needs to be processed in a certain amount of time, or, it needs to be processed in order because otherwise we get big financial penalties by our regulator. That stuff's boring. We don't really care about that, right? But actually it's really important because that's ultimately what we're trying to solve. The technology is the tool. The problem we're trying to solve is the business side.
Yeah. And if you want the business to keep giving you shiny toys to build, you need to make sure that the business can use it. How do you make sure the business can use it? By making sure you can monitor it and report back to them that, in fact, what we promised we'd do, we're doing.
No, exactly. I'm with you.
Yeah.
So I guess then, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, one of the other things that often people just think about a few performance counters as that monitoring strategy as well. And you've got to think slightly bigger about it too, because it's not just a few performance counters. It's overall, what does healthy look like? What does my capacity look like? But you also need to think about security. So monitoring is not just health and performance. It encompasses security as well, which is really important to then build into that, the scoping, that, defining the strategy and everything like that.
And it's also not a we've shipped it now, we need to focus on monitoring thing either. So when we think about DevOps overall, we think about that kind of infinity symbol where you've got in one stage you've got like the planning, the development, going through to your kind of build and test and deploy, but then that last step is monitor. But last step of an iteration, you're always going to be monitoring. It's a continuous thing, continuous monitoring, continuous learning. And I think this is one of the shifts that I still see a lot of people on, is that very basic, as you say, is the system available? Is it healthy? Is it kind of working as we'd expect? But actually, there's so much more that you can do with monitoring. And I guess we're maybe stepping into the realms of observability at this point, which we can come back to as well. But, being able to take some of that insight and say, well, okay, I've deployed the latest version of my application, but actually we've took it through dev, we took it through staging, everything looked fine. But now we've gone into prod, we've actually seen a 5% performance dip, or 5% of our users less are going ahead and actually going through that system. Why is that? We need to dig into all of that telemetry, all of those insights, and understand what is it that we've changed that has actually broken that thing, because something has broken it. And it's that level of insight that I think there's not a lot of organizations who are quite that mature along that path yet. There's still a lot of people on that journey because it's hard. It's hard.
And the reason it's hard is because people think about it by the time it's too late. If you think about monitoring from the beginning and build it into the process, so when you take it through dev test, do you have a baseline defined of what good looks like? Am I collecting the right things so that I can actually make sure I know what good looks like? Because it doesn't help you collect CPU and memory, but actually you're having some trace issues and, So there are a whole bunch. So you need to know exactly what it is, and the best people to define what good looks like are the people writing the software.
And my favorite one I always see come up in the cloud world, because you mentioned CPU a bit earlier. CPU on premises absolutely is a very key metric, because you've got a finite amount of servers you're running on, you've got a finite amount of resource. So always you want to optimize the applications as much as you can. Absolutely you want to go and do that. But in the cloud, if I've got a application that's running across a fleet of servers or a fleet of app services, whatever it may be, and my CPU is hanging around 90% to 95%, I don't think that's a problem. I think that's fine. You've actually done a great thing. You've right-sized your compute for the application that you're running on it. So actually, you're getting great value for the virtual machines that you're running. And I think it's this mindset change, isn't it, for people from that traditional on-premises kind of monitoring mindset into this new kind of cloud world?
Yeah, and I mean, we also don't just have cloud. A lot of customers run hybrid. True. And they may run some components on-prem or some components True. In other spaces. And so whatever you think about, you shouldn't just think about it as one little entity. You need to make sure that you cover end to end and make sure that it's all covered without over collecting.
Yes, absolutely. A unified monitoring strategy where you're going in with your goals, eyes wide open, understanding what those requirements are. You've got a defined baseline, can go forward then and measure the system from that point. Cool, we've solved it. Done. We should go home now.
Yeah, let's go. Because the other thing, of course, what a lot of companies do is that so we've defined our strategy. We have an idea of what good looks like. Okay, but we've defined our strategy around this tool. This tool does about 80% of what we do. So what we're going to do is we're going to buy another tool. And then that one covers another 5% or another 10%, but there are overlaps. And so they have now two tools doing this. And then to fill the gap, they add another tool. And when you look again, suddenly you've got 20 monitoring tools, and you still don't have an end-to-end story because you didn't define your strategy, and you're just plugging holes like Eliza with the buckets and the straws.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I think it's one of those XKCD magazines where they were like, oh, there's 20 protocols, but none of these protocols do what I want. So I'm going to create one protocol that does everything that we need it to do. And so the 21st protocol was born. And it's exactly the same, right? We've got this monitoring tool to do this and this and this, but not quite joining those pieces up to get that end-to-end unified view. And I think we can also look at it not just from a tools perspective, but also the services that we're building as well. Because if you think about the world that we're going from, and I know we can do a hybrid world, but I'll use this as a bit of a journey story for a moment, but thinking of those applications on premises moving to the cloud, typically those applications were on a single server. It was very easy to monitor because it's on that instance or these instances. So there's our application. We can kind of point and touch the applications on those servers. Whereas now it's distributed across, tens of different services. You've got service buses and queues and all these things which decouple calls between these application calls, for example, different microservices. We're in this world where actually it's not just as simple as going, all our stuff happens over there. It's happening all over the place. You don't know if the problem could be on an instance, the communication path between the instances, and it starts making that problem a bit more challenging.
Yeah, no, indeed. And again, if you and what we then do is we go and switch on the diagnostics for everything and sort of like then scramble through the logs and try and build it all up, and because we don't know from the word go what it should look like.
Absolutely. So I guess then if we think about the ideal path, I think we've established where some of those pain points are and some of those challenges. The ideal path is about going ahead and having that upfront planning, as you're doing the building and the designing of that solution, how you're going to be instrumenting it, how you're going to be observing what is going on in the system there. So, what are maybe some of those themes or some of those trends that you've seen that work on the happy path, if you like?
Yes, it's definitely. I mean, when we, from a few of my colleagues and I have a similar approach. I mean, when we go and talk to customers, we sort of talk about the 0 to hero in 6 sessions, because it's like, make sure that you know what it is that you want, make sure that it's properly scoped and things, and ask those questions like, what does healthy look like? What are the things that can break? Because I'm not going to care about something if I've got my application scaled out over 20 VMs or 20 containers, that's highly available. I don't really care about making sure every single one of them is up. I do care if I'm losing 50% of my capacity, and that's maybe something to think about. So, what does my capacity look like? What are the things that can break? What else does it connect to? Because sometimes we only think about the little bits of code that we've written, but we don't think about the database, and maybe there's a storage account, and maybe there is a event hub in between, and are we thinking about these things, and how are we exposing the telemetry from that? And maybe you've written a custom API, or how are you going to expose the telemetry from that? And how are you going to push that into your monitoring tool? So, from an Azure Monitor perspective, obviously we say put everything in log analytics, and from there you can go and correlate. But not all services support that. So how are you, if you're using something that doesn't support it, how are you going to get that telemetry into the right place?
Yeah. No.
Okay, great. Now we're collecting things, and that's fantastic. We're collecting everything, but that doesn't mean anything, because what do you do with that data is really more important. So, do you have any kind of strategy around alerting? And that's a really, really important thing, because it doesn't help that you collect terabytes or petabytes of data a month on monitoring. Fantastic, happy for you. It doesn't do anything for you until you actually have something. Exactly. So how do you approach alerting? What do your alerts need to do for you? Because again, you can set up alert rules in any monitoring tool. You can set up alert rules, and you can have lots of alerts in a portal or in a console or wherever. You could have somebody go and look at those alerts every day, and they go, "Ooh, that's nice." Close. It doesn't help.
And
again.
This is it. There's a danger, isn't there, of though if you are collecting data from everything and you're kind of the analogy I always give is, okay, you've got a ton of haystacks and you're trying to find the needle, but you don't even know which haystack you first need to look in to actually find the needle. And something that struck me as you were explaining a bit earlier, and something I guess was there in my mind but hadn't really pulled out just yet, was thinking actually about the problem that you're trying to solve again, right? The question you're trying to ask. And the example you gave, I think, was about the virtual machines and the instances. You know, if one's gone down, not really bothered. If half have gone down, I'm probably starting to get concerned at this point. But actually, when you think about it again, that there are almost different layers of those different questions that you might want to ask, right? Because there's going to be Joe Blogs on the technical team, for example, who goes, right, we need to make sure we've got high availability. But okay, you've got high availability. So what? What does that actually mean? You know, and if you translate it back to the business and the business say, well, actually, if it's outside of business hours, then we don't really care what happens. But if it's inside business hours, we absolutely need to guarantee processing or users to access the website within X amount of time. Then you can start mapping that back to actually, here's how we need to start monitoring and understanding, can we solve that exam question for the business?
Exactly. You know, and if you've got customers globally, then you do care about it being available. But if you're only servicing a small region, then absolutely, you know, shut it down at
Exactly.
night. And yeah, and then and the same with the alerts. You know, does if you're only if you're focused on one geo or one region, do you really need to wake people up at 2 o'clock in the morning?
Exactly.
You know, so think about those things and put yourself in the shoes of those people who get woken up. Is like, do I really need to be woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning because the CPU or the memory spiked above 90% for 5 minutes? No, it's probably backups. We don't care, you know. But oh goodness, we have several services down. Our customers sitting in another time zone actually cannot, you know, use our services. We need to wake somebody up at 2 o'clock in the morning. And how do we do that? Do we integrate with a call center or an ITSM tool? Do we send them a text? Do we send their manager a text and hope he'll phone them?
Indeed. And I think this is where we're getting into the interesting parts of Azure Monitor now, because I think, you know, in the past, when we think about something like log analytics, it was kind of one service over here. You had application insights over here. Whereas I think over recent years, what we've really seen with Azure and Azure Monitor as a whole is this kind of suite of products really coming together to form this great monitoring story. Because as you say, we've got log analytics, which is part of Azure Monitor. You've then got alerts, which can be pretty much turned on across, I think, any resource now these days. There's so many where you've got it. And you've got dashboards you can even pin then to the Azure dashboards as well in the Azure portal. It's really becoming this cohesive story. I think even application insights, you can now back those by log analytics workspaces and get some of the benefits of log analytics. So it's really becoming this cohesive story. And I think some of the challenges, maybe for anyone who's listening in that have been on their Azure journey for a few years and haven't quite looked at maybe this space for a while, some of those challenges that you may have had before are actually resolved, I would say, in some cases, because it's actually becoming a really great suite of services there.
Yeah, I mean, the insights are amazing. They
Yes.
really focus deeply on specific areas. They're all backed by log analytics, so you can still go and correlate the data yourself. And we've got these workbooks now as well that give you the ability to build your own visualizations and again do that correlation. I still think of Azure Monitor as a bit as a sort of a big bucket of Lego blocks, you know, because we give you all this great capability. And, you know, in the past, we had some monitoring tools that people would use and maybe complain that it's a bit noisy and things because we switched everything on. And with Azure Monitor, we've really gone the other way and sort of given you this really great big buckets of Duplo blocks and Lego blocks and little figurines and everything else. And you can go and build your story and it all becomes nice and cohesive. But it's not going to work for you. Just like any other tool is going to fall flat if you don't do that planning up front. And also understanding what your operational team needs.
And I think it's also important for us to visit the flip side as well, right? While planning is important, failing to plan, planning to fail. We all know that line. Um, you can't plan for every eventuality. We're being realistic. We know
No,
that, right? But I think to inject, obviously, one of my passion areas now, the DevOps mindset of things here, that the important bit is being able to learn from those challenges where things are going to go wrong. It's the cloud. You're in an internet-based kind of routing environment. You're in an environment which is built for scale. Things do go wrong. This is the world we operate in. But it's our jobs as architects, as engineers who go ahead and build on these services to go ahead and build systems where we focus on those requirements and we make sure, right, if we need to hit that super high level of availability, then we need to accommodate this in our design. And I guess where I'm going with this long-winded explanation here is that even on the monitoring side, yes, you're not going to be able to cover every eventuality, but being able to learn from that is super important. And something that I love about what you just said is the workbook side of things. I'm a huge, huge fan of workbooks because the way I kind of see workbooks is twofold. Number one, am I able to answer those exam questions from the very beginning that we've outlined? These are the highly critical things to make sure our solution is running as we expect. But number two, we've encountered some really strange, weird edge case that we hadn't anticipated in any of our testing whatsoever. You know what? Let's just put a workbook together, which helps us easily triage. Are we starting to see this use case come up again, or this edge case come up again? Because there'll be, scenarios where, of course, you go and fix that thing in your application. Regressions can enter, new bugs can enter, which manifest and look like this kind of issue. Can you build workbooks that then help you easily triage some of those challenges that you've identified in the past as well? So not just encountering a challenge and going, okay, that happened, we've solved it, let's move on. But how do you learn from that and then build that into the playbook or the workbook that you're running then as well?
no, exactly, and it should be a continuous process. So when you discover that you've had an issue, when you go back to correct the code, you should also at that point correct the monitoring. And it's absolutely iterative. You don't just build a monitoring solution and okay, it's delivered. Now that is it for the next 2, 4, 6, 20 years. It needs to be an ongoing process. You need to review it on a monthly basis. Are these alerts still making sense for me? Is it still making sense for me to collect this telemetry? Is there something that I'm missing? What are the gaps? And that's something that you're going to build on continuously. And that's why it's probably a good idea to, at the beginning, collect the bare minimum, set up the bare minimum of alerts, say, these are the things we've seen on-prem, especially for that scenario of we've migrated from on-prem to the cloud. These are the things that we saw on-prem. Identify the 5 things, just 5 things that could go wrong. Focus on them and maybe focus on the things that are the noisiest. Is we see this kind of thing happen often. Let's set up alerts for those, fix them. When that noise goes away, focus on the next 5 things. That way you can also make sure that by the time this application is like really mature and your operational teams can support it in their sleep, they also know they're not going to get woken up at 2:00 in the morning with something that they told you to fix 6 months ago, because it's new things waking them up. And just like developers like to have new shiny things, so operational engineers also like new things. It's rather give me a new challenge than waking me up once a week for the same problem. I'm going to get annoyed.
Yeah, and what I like about what you said there, this kind of rolling 5 issues that we're going to work on, is actually what you're doing there, just to really pull it out for people, is just setting a gradual baseline. You don't have that baseline of the cloud right now. Let's just work in phases and actually work towards what is normal for our environment. And, if there's a blip along the way, then you need to go revisit it and put it back onto that top 5 again. And hey, look, we're now in a DevOps world because we're continuously going through that cycle once again. And really like what you said there.
And that approach can work whether you're fully IaaS based or fully PaaS based or a mix of the
Mm.
two. And because if you're trying to find 100 things up front, you're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to collect a lot of stuff. You're going to get pissed off with your bill at the end of the
Yep.
month because you're going to have this massive amount of telemetry and log analytics that you're not using. And you're going to get frustrated. Don't overwhelm yourself. Take it in small bites. I've been told this is offensive, but in Africa we have a saying that how do you eat an elephant is one
Okay.
spoonful at a
Yep.
time.
Yeah, I've heard that.
You know,
Heard that saying many times. It's actually commonly used in the DevOps space because again, you don't want to do that traditional waterfall approach of right, we've got this project, we're going to take it all, and now it's in production kind of thing. But you want to gradually, as you say, bite away, chip away at the thing, and eventually, that's how you get there. But interestingly, one thing you
yes.
mentioned there was the costing side of things as well, and it's important for us just to talk about that because I think that's where I've seen some gripes in the past. And it's exactly down to the challenges that we've already been talking about, right? Is the fact that there is no clear strategy, there is no clear approach of here's what we want to monitor, here are the questions we're looking to solve. And because of the way, and this isn't just an Azure thing, this is a cloud in general thing, of monitoring and logging and how it's kind of built, is that you're paid on ingestion, you're paid on storage. Two reasonable things from a provider perspective of how you would bill for a service that does that type of thing. And because it's done on that basis, sod's law, the more you're going to put in, the more money is going to come out. I guess that analogy works. And it's again, there is a very tangible reason for you to do that upfront planning because ultimately the decision you then have to make is the value of what we're getting back from our monitoring system worth the bill that we're getting? And if you've done it as you've been explaining there, Vanessa, and you've done that strategy up front, it's going to be okay. If you haven't done that, the scales are going to tip the other way around.
And part of that is what is the cost to my business of an outage?
Yes.
So if you think if you didn't have the monitoring in place and you have an outage, what is that impact? Does it offset that cost? So it's kind of a little bit like paying insurance. Your house is not going to burn down every month, but you pay that amount so that when it burns down, you're covered. And monitoring is kind of the same way. You're not going to buy insurance once you've lived in a house for 20 years and it's now at risk of catching on fire spontaneously. Hope it doesn't. But you're going to sort of, when you move into the house, you buy that insurance. And the same thing with monitoring is when you move into your production environment, have the monitoring ready and also understand. Now from an Azure Monitor perspective, one of the things that came lit up recently is the insights for log analytics, which actually gives you that ability to look at what your top ingestion sources are and so on. So if you do have this big bill and you kind of don't know where to start doing some trimming down, there is a really nice insight that provides you with that.
Awesome. And I think this is where also you see this cohesive story coming together because, had we had this discussion a few years ago, Insights wasn't there, workbooks weren't quite there yet, I think a few years ago at that point. This cohesive story where we're starting to see things like Kubernetes, things like virtual machines, all these different services starting to build their own insights option inside their service where you can do that at a glance or go from Azure Monitor and see the exact same views and that consistency. It's just awesome. And if that's not enough, well, okay, you can go build your own by using workbooks. It's this really nice, elegant story, which is kind of evolving.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the big thing is that elegance of just the insights give you like the finished ball gown and you can go dance and you don't have to worry about, turning a pumpkin into a carriage and
Absolutely. So I guess that we've established then the strategy piece. We've talked about the cost side of things and the fact that failing to plan, planning to fail, and you'll get that bill as a result because you're monitoring everything. We've talked about, I guess, some of those top tips on getting started. So I guess as people are going through their journey, then, they've gone past those initial planning phases and planning stages. What are some of those next areas that start cropping up that you see?
Automation, automation, automation. So, as part of that whole process of the monthly review of, is monitoring working for me? You've got those 5 alerts. Part of that, maybe part of that resolving those top 5 issues is that you identify the things that could be automated. It's like, okay, if we get that alert, these are the things that we do to resolve it. Oh, can we go and automate some of this and take the human factor out of it? Because the more you can take the human factor out of responding to alerts at 2 a.m., the better your monitoring experience will become as well. And so you start with those 5, maybe you automate 4 of them, and 1 of them you resolve and it goes away completely. With the next 5, you go through this process again of run it, evaluate it, what can we automate, and automate everything as much as possible. The data collection, don't leave it to people to switch on buttons to collect data. Automate it so that you don't get to a crisis and suddenly go, oh shit, my monitoring's not switched on.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned about the better monitoring experience. I think there'll be a lot of happy engineers as well who'll be happy not to be called out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning. But I think there are absolutely ways of doing that. I think early when you said about alerts, you talked about text, you talked about ITSM and email, but Logic Apps webhooks are some of those things that you can do as well, right? So it's not even like you have to do a lot of complex integration work to go ahead and actually set that up. You can just go create your Logic App, set your flow as you want it to go and do whatever it is, and then go ahead and actually wire those together, and that's it.
Exactly, and build it. That's why I say evaluate how a human would do it. Is and often it takes get them to write it down for a week. When I get this alert, I phone this person, and then I do this action, and then I send this email, and build your automation to do that for you. That way, you'll have fewer escalations to your service desk. You'll have you can even go and let it log the ticket in your ITSM system, do the automation and remediation, pop over an email to the application manager, and then close the ticket off and done.
And I think that's the beauty, isn't it, as well, is if it's one of those issues that actually you can't solve immediately for whatever reason, you've seen it come up before, but it's either just one of those lingering issues, it's not a huge pain point, it's just something that is frustrating and is there. Even something like that, you could automate the resolution to that. If it is just a case of, hey, we just need to restart that machine, okay, that alert comes in, go ahead, fire off a Logic App to restart that machine, done. You don't need someone to tune in at 2 a.m. to go ahead and restart that machine, for example. And, I'm being, again, a little facetious there. That's obviously a really simple scenario, but this is kind of the thing, is going back to the point that I made earlier, you're going to see certain things come up. You're going to see these challenges that arise, and you need to learn from them. And whether that is putting fixes in place temporarily like that, just to kind of keep things rolling for the time being until a broader fix is out. Really, what it is about being pragmatic, isn't it? To solve those problems and keep the operational health healthy.
Exactly, and I know that we live in this very agile world where people don't do documentation, but sometimes you do need a bit of documentation to say this is what it looks like, and so if the automation fails, you still need to be able to remediate. But so also, if you think about it, if I have a group of 10 people, even if they're all at the same skill level, I give them the same set of instructions. Yep. You can have 10 ways of that work being done. And often we have failures that are caused by human error of somebody trying to remediate an issue. So automate what you can, make sure that it's documented, make sure that it has all those nice bells and whistles of letting people know and so on. But at least then you've got consistency, and that makes it a lot easier that if something does go wrong with that remediation, you can still troubleshoot because you know it was done in a consistent way. You don't have to cater for all these 10 nuances of all 10 people doing something different.
Yeah, and love what you said there. I couldn't add anything or make it any better. I love what you said. I think one thing just to echo and iterate, because I know you're coming from the monitoring angle, I'll come at it from the DevOps angle. Anyone who uses Agile as an excuse to get out of documentation should have a chat with me, because I disagree with that approach as well. And I would love to have a discussion with you if you really believe that, because I'd love to understand that insight. I get self-documenting code, I get lightweight documentation and build as you go, but no documentation, I don't think it's a substitute. So let's have that chat. But so we've established then that we can automate things as well as bringing that into the strategy that we've built and established from the very beginning. That helps us with the cost side of things. As we start getting to that more comfortable operational state, is there more that we can still be thinking about? Is it a case of just, right, we've sorted that project, it's time for us to roll on? How do we maybe share those practices, I guess, is maybe what I'm getting at.
Well, I mean, have a wiki, make sure that the knowledge stays in the organization. I think the other thing, I did allude to it earlier, but I think one of the things that people often forget about as part of this whole strategy and part of this continuous improvement and things is security. And so, if you fixed all the health and performance issues and you're not doing anything around security monitoring, then that's probably the next thing to focus on, because monitoring is not just health and performance. It really is that end-to-end story. And even if you've separated the administration of those functions out, it is still something that you need to talk about and think about cohesively.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's some great services and tools available in Azure to help with that once again build or integrate, I guess is a better way of saying it, integrate with log analytics as well. Thinking about Azure Sentinel, for example, which is a great service. I think we had Andrew Nathan come on the show and talk about that quite some time ago. So I'll link to that somewhere if anyone's wondering. I'll make sure that's linked. But again, that will have evolved quite a lot since then. I think it was last year that we actually had Andrew on talking about that. But again, that's not the silver bullet necessarily, because if we're going into the PaaS space of the world and the application space of the world, it's not just about those underlying components and infrastructure that we're building upon. There's the security aspects of my application. So how do I know, for example, that let's say someone is going ahead and trying to brute force an API endpoint and log in as a user, for example? It's those types of things as well that you'll want to have that cohesive strategy. So yes, you've got things like log analytics, which are typically at the infrastructure layer. Yes, you've got things like application insights, which are typically embedded in your application code. But how do you then start bringing all of that together into that one cohesive story with the insights from things like Sentinel as well to build that all up picture?
So I mean, Application Insights now uses a general log analytics workspace as its backend, so you can easily switch over all your applications. You let them use a single log analytics workspace, or as much as possible. I mean, there are reasons why you would split it out, but if you can consolidate them, so consolidate your infrastructure logs into it, consolidate your performance telemetry from all your components into the same space, and understand what that baseline is, so that you can also do that correlation between components, because you have your firewalls writing there, you've got your network components writing there, you've got potentially still some virtual machines, your containers, all of those using the same log analytics workspace. It becomes a lot easier to correlate that data and start doing those visualizations. So, whether you're using workbooks to visualize or Power BI, or if you're taking it out into Grafana, who's got native connectors as well, that's another option. Just as long as you have something that works for you, because again, you can implement 20 tools and none of them can work for you, or you can implement one tool very well with a good structure and it can work beautifully. But also, keep going back to that strategy. If it doesn't work for you, update it. It's not cast in stone.
Yep.
None of this is cast in stone. So keep reviewing. Make sure that you've got process around it. Because without a good process, you may as well just switch it off.
Exactly. Couldn't say it any better myself. So I guess then we've been talking for 40 minutes roughly here now, I think. What would be the things that you want the listeners and the viewers to leave with here? So if they had to take away maybe a top 3 things, for example, Vanessa's top 3 tips, what would they be?
Okay. Don't implement a tool just because it's there. Choose the right tool for the job. And that goes with anything, but especially with monitoring. Don't define your strategy around the tool. Define your strategy and make sure the tool fits into that. And if it means you need multiple tools, that's fine. But don't just buy tools or implement tools because this guy in that team says that tool is amazing and it does everything for him. Make sure that it is the right thing, fit for your organization. Don't collect just for the sake of collecting telemetry. Yeah. Collect what you need and review it on a regular basis. And don't just let all of that telemetry sit there. Do stuff with it. Get alerts out of it. Automate things. Visualize, share, let people have the ability to access all this telemetry, because you'd be surprised how often people don't have access to monitoring telemetry and they have to go and ask the one guy that runs the monitoring tool, and then they end up putting in their own tools because that doesn't work for them. So just, obviously with security data, you've got some considerations, but with Azure Monitor and Log Analytics, we now have resource-based permissions anyway. So, give people access to their monitoring data, let them explore it, let them use it. Use it, I think, is the most important thing. And don't treat it like an afterthought.
And I think
make it your best friend.
Absolutely. And I think the point you made there about let people actually use it really, again, comes back to that DevOps point about you build it, you operate it, you maintain it, you fix it. You are the team that own your project and own your product that you have built. So that end-to-end cycle. You don't have a DevOps team or a monitoring team that come in and rescue things for you. You are the team that go ahead and maintain and manage that service, because quite likely you've built in the cloud, you've built it as a service rather than the product now. So exciting talk, excellent talk. Thank you, Vanessa, for lots of great insight shared there. I have one more question to ask you, and it's a very important one. Could you please move aside to show your background to everyone? We had to get that in, of course. I'm sure there were many people who were wondering what this is and what the thing is in the background there. So, of course, a monitoring background.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Excellent. No, thank you for joining, Vanessa. And I'm sure we could fill another slot. So we'll have to have you back soon.
Thank you.
So, folks, we've learned tons there about monitoring. We've started off really with the defining the strategy and understanding what are we actually monitoring? Why are we even on this journey? Why are we doing this? Going through then to translating that into which tools we need to go and choose and which tools are right for us, all the way through then to what do we do with that information, that data, actually converting it into something actionable, whether it's alerts, whether it's automation, and actually doing something with it as a result. So, lots for you to take away there. You know the deal. If you've liked the episode, please hit the like button. Please hit subscribe so you can see all of the other content coming out. And if you're really keen, hit the notification bell so you know as soon as there is new content available on the channel. And of course, it's not just YouTube, it's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and cloudwithchris.com, where you can listen to the recording of this video, or this audio, I guess, at that point, and read the transcript in real time as well. And if you don't like audio video, well, we've got blog posts for you as well on cloudwithchris.com. So go ahead, take a look at that there. But otherwise, stay safe, stay healthy, folks. And until the next episode, thanks for tuning in and bye for now.